Hey, welcome back to the podcast. I told you I'd get some episodes going, and I'm able to keep that promise, at least for the next couple of weeks. Um, so, nothing like jumping right into it. This is what we're going to talk about today is the continuation of the top 10 things about Wi-Fi that we would really like you to know. We'd really like everybody to know about it, to be honest with you. But we started it a while ago, a year ago, and we got kind of sidetracked, got kind of hung up. And so one of my biggest priorities for this has been bothering me for months and months and months now, which is why now that I'm flying solo, I said, hey, guess what? I'm going to do what I want to do, and I'm going to finish my top 10 list because it's been driving me bonkers. I've had the slide deck done forever, and I'm like, it's that last little piece that I want to like just finish up and let's get this all wrapped up so then I can move on. I can kind of put that to bed and I can move on and I can do bigger and better things. So without further ado, let's get into the top 10 things that we want you to know about Wi-Fi, or at least the top 10 things we came up with. This list is nowhere near everything. It was just sort of like, hey, of all the things that we keep hearing about, that we keep getting questioned on, that Wi-Fi professionals sort of get all the time. It's like, what are the top 10 things we really wish that more people knew, more people realized, because it make our life a lot easier. So I'm going to put a link into this show notes back to at least the first one, and you can kind of then start going through. If you haven't listened to those, or if you need a refresher, you can go back through all those. So I think we got through 8 at about a half an hour in each. So 4 hours of me and John talking about the top 10 things about Wi-Fi. And so to sort of kick off season 5, we're going to wrap up what we left off in season 4. So let's get to it. Let me run through the list for you. The one thing that the first thing we always talk about that it always comes up is the client is always in charge. The client is always driving things. If you ever hear a Wi-Fi professional say something to the effect of, it would just be, our jobs would be so much easier if we didn't have clients. This is why, is because, we have to support. I mean, when you talk about like a BYOD network, pretty much any Wi-Fi network is like the ultimate BYOD. Bring whatever device you can. And when you get into some of these networks where it's a residential or hospitality or LPV or some of these other ones, it becomes it's like the wild west of anything and everything of devices that people have kicking around in their closets, and they're like, oh, I'm going to bring this. I'm going to bring my 10-year-old Google Pixel, the original one, or I'm going to bring, I was at a network about a month ago, and somebody broke out their iPhone 6, and I was like, whoa, they're still rocking the iPhone 6. It had the home button on it, and like, I got confused. I forgot how to work that thing. I had to think about like, hey, there's an actual physical home button. How did that work? Can I try to remember what that was like? Because it's been so long. So that was number one. Number 2. More is not always better. More can pretty much mean for anything. I've fixed a couple networks over the past couple of months in my new position, and the first thing I always do is turn down the power, or I'll turn off APs, because more is not always better. Number 3, what are the requirements? Man, I got some horror stories I could tell you about, requirements that I've had over the past year of doing stuff like that. So, man, I'm looking at this list and I'm like, man, I'm just loving how it was applicable a year ago, and it's still applicable today. That's how important this list is. It all starts with a good design. Holy smokes, man. If you missed it in the last episode, I said I was the manager of the design team, and I can tell you, it all starts with a good design. Default isn't always the best, but sometimes it is. and learning what do you change and what don't you change, man, that is really tricky as you start to go. And one thing I can tell you is it goes back to my presentation I did a few years ago, WLPC, where it's like have firmly held beliefs that you are willing to change, because I can tell you Default isn't always the best, and it keeps changing, especially with a Wi-Fi 7. There are some things where it's like, man, just don't touch it. Just don't mess with it because it will screw things up. And there's other things where it's like, man, you have to change what we had in the past. So default isn't always best. Trust but verify. Again, man, I love this list. Trust but verify. We think we set things in controllers. We think we design it like this. And then, the installers get a hold of it. Somebody goes and configures it. Is it really what we wanted it to do? Did we put that tagged VLAN or that untagged VLAN on the right place in the port? Is that, so we can trust people, but man, when things aren't working right, the first place you do is you go verify. Security is great until the client doesn't support it. Again, another great one, especially with the Wi-Fi 7 and some of the other things we have coming out with 6 gigahertz. Man, that's a great one. It's not always about the speed. Holy Moses. Wi-Fi 7 MLO. So since we finished with number 8 a year ago, we've now done 2 WLPC Wi-Fi 7 fests. We did one in Prague in October of 2024, and then we did another one in Phoenix in February of 2025. And I was at both of them, and I helped support. Phil Morgan did it, and for whatever reason, because I was there and I'm loud, it was like, oh, it's Phil and Jim. No, this is all Phil Morgan. He set this up. This was his brainchild. This was his idea. I just showed up because I had gear and I like to play. And it is not always about the speed, because each time in the Wi-Fi 7 Fest at WLPC, we spent an hour maybe, and Phil and I did this together. We did it together. We did it twice and we still messed it up. When you turn on MLO for Wi-Fi 7, your top end speed gets handicapped because MLO is not about the speed. It is 100% not about the speed. And we fought that for an hour in Prague, hour and a half in Prague, and then for an hour in Phoenix. And I finally looked at Phil and I said, wait a second, Phil. I said, I was showing off punctured transmission and we were kind of playing around with MLO. I said, did we leave MLO turned on the WLAN? And he went, well, yeah. And I said, well, do you remember what happened to us in Prague a couple of months ago? And he said some words that I won't repeat here because I was thinking them. And we turned off MLO and all of a sudden our top end speed just climbed. So it's not always about the speed. So that gets us up to speed. And so let's kick off with our next one on the list that I want to talk about today, which is Wi-Fi is intended to work poorly. This is actually one of Keith Parsons' favorite things to say. If you've ever listened to Keith, if you've ever talked to Keith, this is the one thing that he loves to say is Wi-Fi is intended to work poorly. So I want to spend some time today going over what does this really mean? Because we say it, or you'll hear somebody say it, but what does it mean when we say Wi-Fi is intended to work poorly? Because it does. It's designed to work poorly. It's designed to work bad. But what does that mean and why do we say that? So, Wi-Fi is intended to work poorly. When I first thought of this was this meme right here. John, this is actually John. John came up with this. And I was like, this is awesome. This is unbelievably awesome. And how many times you heard somebody say, the Wi-Fi works like garbage? And we always go, yeah. But it is working. It is working. It's working poorly, but it's working, which means that it's not broken because it's designed to work poorly. So let's talk about what does that mean? Because yes, it is working. And when you think about it, if you've ever been in a controller, especially all the advanced settings in a controller, and you've looked at all that stuff, and if you get on social media, you have people asking all these questions about all that stuff. There's so many different settings, and a lot of those settings, if we set them wrong, will simply make the network not function at all. And so, you get to that point where it's like, hey, I can turn it on, it'll run. But if you really want it to run, you really want it to hum and you really want it to perform at its peak level, it takes a lot of tuning. In my previous job, I referred to it as drag racing. It was like we looked at the network and we said, what is every little thing that we could take out of our network? that was slowing it down because we were all about the speed. We got really infatuated with speed. And so we said, hey, let's tune it. And we spent a year and a half tuning that network to where it just hauled. It was only about the speed. It wasn't about resiliency. It wasn't about stability. It was about just pure speed. Even though the last one in the list is not about the speed, but we took the time. We said, hey, let's make it about the speed. And then we went to the security. We actually, did all the other fun stuff. But, there's this huge gap and there's this huge range of where we can be between working poorly, but still working, and just a fantastic network over on this side. You have, hey, I'm just coming into the screen, it's just working, but then it's like, it can go all the way across, and it's like, bam, I get to that point where it's just a network that is just humming. It's just tuned perfectly. It's fantastic. And so, but there's this wide range. Now, why is there a wide range? So let's take a look at this. And I'm going to go backwards a little bit. I want to talk about copper Ethernet, the stuff that Wi-Fi is meant to replace, but, we can't work without it. And so copper Ethernet. And this is the example I always use. And I always start with this. And I always ask people, I go, when you plug a network cable into a switch port, it auto-negotiates its connection speed. What connection speed do we normally see in today's networks? And I'm like, name off those speeds for me. And so there's 10, 100, 1000. That's been around for decades, right? And in a lot of these newer networks, they've even dropped to 10. But for the sake of today's argument, I'm going to go with 10, 100, 1000. Then, now that we've gotten into these multi-gig, now we're 2.5, 5, and 10. So when you look at it, there's six speeds that you can negotiate at. Probably, but more than likely, probably going to be 5. 100, 1000, 2.5, 5, and 10. That's kind of where you're going to be on these connection speeds. It's going to be one of those 5, or it's just not going to work, right? And so we're assuming it's connected, so that's why I didn't include 0. But you're going to have 5, 6 at the top end. But now let's compare that with Wi-Fi. And the first one I'm going to talk about is 802.11 AC. So we're going to go back to Wi-Fi 5. Wi-Fi 5 came out in 2013, 2014, so 11, 12 years ago. When you look at the charts, there are 628 possible PHY rates that your client can be connected to the AP at based on a bunch of different variables, right? We're talking RSSI, SNR, channel bandwidth, how many spatial streams, what is your coding, what is your guard intervals, and they take all these variables and they put them into a ball, a magic 8 ball, and they shake it all up, and it's like, okay, what do we get out? And you get out one of 628 possible PHY rates that your device is connected to the AP at. Now, that's not the speed that you're going to get when you do a speed test. Now, we're talking about the actual physical connection. It's going to be one of these 628 rates. Now, but that was Wi-Fi 5. So what if we fast forward to where we're at today with 802.11be? So now there's about approximately 10,000 combinations in the spec. let me just put that out there. In the spec, there's about 10,000 possible combinations between the QAM, what modulation, what coding, guard intervals, because now we have another guard interval. It used to be just short and long. Now we have 3 guard intervals. We've 802.11 AC, Wi-Fi 5, we had 256 QAM. Well, then in Wi-Fi 6, we added 1024 QAM. And in Wi-Fi 7, we added 4K QAM or 4096 QAM. So now you've added these 2 extra layers. We've added a whole bunch of more spatial streams. We have additional MCS rates. We just have all these different things. And so when you have one of these nice, shiny, Wi-Fi 7 APs that you're now getting from Ruckus, hint, hint, or anybody else, when your Wi-Fi 7 client connects, and there's a lot of them out there, A year ago there wasn't me, but now most major, the high end stuff or even the middle of the road stuff is now coming out with Wi-Fi 7. It doesn't necessarily have to be the 6 gigahertz capable. And so depending on those different variables, you're now talking about, there's just all these different variables because now we have 320 megahertz wide channels, the 3 guard intervals, 16 spatial streams, 4096 QAM, the coding, what we're using on the coding, your SNR, your RSSI, you take all these different variables and you're going to be in one of 10,000 possible combinations. And that's just the fire rate. And then we talk about, and the fire rate is the maximum you could ever possibly get. But when you start sending data and all these other variables start changing, guard intervals, the MC, your modulation, as it downshifts because it's trying to get that coveted ACK, from the other side of it, it starts roaming within these 10,000 potential combinations of speeds. And so what we have is we have this top end potential speed of 46 gigabits per second, but more real world like, we're probably you're looking at about 5 gigabits per second, but you're going anywhere from 5 gigabits per second down to the minimum basic rate, which can be 6 megabits per second. So when we compare that up to our copper Ethernet above here, when we're looking at that, it's like 10 megabits per second. Well, I'll do you one better. We can go down 6. Wi-Fi can be anywhere from 6 if you leave those defaults alone. I tell people a lot of time now, I'm like, dude, go to 12, go to 24 until you get to 6 gigahertz and then multi-BS SID and all that stuff. So it's like, yeah. So you're potentially looking at anywhere from 6 megabits per second up to 5 gigabits per second, and all these different variables that live in between there. There's just so many of them, right? That becomes a problem. So it just bounces all within that, and anything outside of our control can also change that, can make that number change. And so that's why it's intended to work poorly, is because it's backwards compatible and it will move anywhere between, even if you set the minimum basic rate at 24 megabits per second, which is probably the highest recommended that you'll see, you're still just double that 10. And so then when you think about the fact that you have, even if you just go with 600 different rates between 12 or 24 megabits per second and up to that 9 gigabits per second. I mean, it's a lot more than that, right? It's anywhere working within there, but it still works. So that's why it does. Now, if you want to learn more about this, if you want to see more about this, there's a URL, mcsindex.net, that is run by our friend from the Clear to Send podcast, Francois Verges, with Semfio Networks. He does that, and he has a tab that I highly recommend you go look at, called The Math Behind It. And he actually talks about how do we end up with all these different rates and what those different variables are and how it impacts. And you can see the formula, you can see how does we adjust these different variables, how does it change the rates that we could potentially get. So I want to talk about the modulation. Now, in the early days, we used phase shift modulation. So we're talking about BPSK and binary phase shift keying. And then we went to QPSK, quadrature phase shift keying. I'm not going to go all the way back to DSSS and some of those other ones. But then we get into the QAM. I was talking about QAM, right? With all the different QAM rates. I want to talk about QAM here real quick because this is really what we're seeing nowadays is the quadrature amplitude modulation. You're going to see some of these older ones on older devices, but for the most part, I mean, we're talking about in the past 15, 18 years, we're only seeing QAM stuff. And we can be anywhere from 16 to 4,000 QAM. Now, I want to take a look at what this looks like, what that quadrature amplitude modulation looks like. It goes into a thing we call a constellation. And it is literally just a quadrature So we have our little 4 quadrants here, and the amplitude and the modulation. I'm not going to get into all how this works. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to a video uh, from Keith Parsons that does such a fantastic job of explaining how all this stuff, the amplitude part of that works. But we're really looking out for this one. I want to pay attention to just the quadrature modulation and say, hey, we're gonna send out a wave, and we're gonna try to hit one of these 16 points. This is 16 quam we're looking at here, and we can see because we have the four quadratures, and we have 4 points within each quadrature. 4 times 4, 16 quam. And so within that, you have a thing called, or there's a 16 quam. But now let's take a look at a piece in there that's called the error vector magnitude. And Keith talks about it, but I'm going to hit it real quick before I run out of time here. So let's talk about the error vector magnitude. I'm going to pull up this 16 quam again, and say we're trying to hit the error vector magnitude is really just a target. It's a target box, right? How big is our target box? We're trying to get that. We're trying to send over the air, and we're going to indicate whether it's a 1 or a 0, right? Whether it's a hit or whether it's not, or what we're trying to send. And we have to get it within a certain area of the target, which is that dot, to register as a valid hit. So when you take a look at it, we're looking at in 16 quam, you're looking at 1/4 of that quadrant. Anywhere within this red box is going to be registered as a valid hit, that you're hitting the target. We're going to say, hey, if that modulation and that amplitude gets you into that red box, it's still going to register and go, yes, I know what that is. I'm going to register it. We're good to go. And this is called the error vector magnitude. Magnitude being the size, the error meaning, how far off of that center point you are. That, what's your margin of error? And then the vector is, in that angle, as we're trying to hit into it. Because if you think about the one that's up in those upper corners, they're coming off that center point, and they're, it's that vector, right? What is your vector from that center point? And so it's like, what is your error on that vector, and how big is that? And so you can see, as long as you hit anywhere within here, it's gonna register, it's gonna count. This is 16 quam. So it's super slow, but it's super resilient. But when we upgrade and we talk about what's coming out in Wi-Fi 7 with 4096 quam, same constellation, or at least the same 4 quadrants, but now instead of having 4 targets to hit in that same quadrant, we now have 1,024 different targets. And so we still have our EVM, which means that EVM, is going to take up, what used to be, you'd get anywhere within that square, right? There's 256 dots within that same area, because it's 10,024 within that quadrant itself. So we used to have, so if you think 1020 or 256 times 4, that's 1024. So now we have 1024 in the quadrant. So 1/4 of that, which we had on the EVM for the 16 quam, what you registers as a hit in the 16 quam is now going to be one of 256 different possibilities in a 4K quam constellation. So that is what we're trying to do. So when you see those top end numbers in Wi-Fi 7, and you go, wow, how come I'm not getting it? It's like, well, because your margin of error went from 1, and that same margin of error now covers 256 potential different targets. And so your error margin of error went from 1 down to now you have to be within 256. So that is why we talk about, hey, it works. It's not that top end speed, because we're trying to hit such these minute targets so fast, and we're trying to do it all the time because we're trying to run 5 gigabits per second. To think about what that takes, and to hit these targets on these EVMs in these constellations, that is why Wi-Fi will work poorly, is because it will downshift and go, you know what, we're going to try to go back to that 16 quam, where what would be one of 256 potential possibilities is now one of one potential. And we can make that, and it's resilient, and we'll get that through all the time, every day. And it's slow, but it works. So there's my 4096 quam. So that's what that is. Here's the link to the, I went ahead and added it too. I forgot I did that. So that's here. So you can go ahead and go watch that video and watch Keith explain it. He does a much better job than I do. Talks about how the waves are created, how all that's modulated, and what we're trying to do. And he breaks it down. But this is why when we say Wi-Fi is intended to work poorly, it's because it's shifting all through those different, 10,000 potential speed possibilities. So, and that is before we get into the distributed coordination function, which is the 7 different checks and balances that our clients go through just to send one packet, or to get a block X so they can send a series of packets. So we have to go through all of that is just to send it, but we have this whole other process called the distributed coordination function that we have to go through just to do that. And so the more people you get in there trying to send their data, then the harder it is. And then because there's so much noise, then you downshift in your modulation, and it goes slow, but it still works. So, but the distributed coordination function is really the heart of the CSM-ACA, which is the carrier sense multiple access collision avoidance. The collision avoidance part is, I can't tell if there's a collision. So I'm going to go through all these checks and balances in the distributed coordination function in order to be ready to send my data, to send my packet, or to receive my packet. The AP has to play within this same thing just as much as the station. So that is why Wi-Fi is intended to work poorly. And it will work. Maybe not the way you want, but it'll work. And I've touched on it a little bit, but we still have the RF anomalies. We still have all those different things of, people walking by, or you get a crazy electrical burst, or you get, somebody fires up their MiFi hotspot. There's all these other things that can happen that will impact the way all that works. And again, Wi-Fi is intended to work poorly because it will adjust on the fly to handle all those things. Now, we have all these other tricks that we try to do to get around that, especially with Wi-Fi 7 and punctured transmission and multi-link operation and stuff like that. But we're still sort of working on this whole thing of the distributed coordination function, the collision, which is the basis of the collision avoidance. And then when you throw in RF anomalies, yes. So when it doesn't work fast, but it still works, kind of think about us and go, hey, what are we really trying to do here? We're trying to send videos through the air, and it's 4K videos, and it looks really good. And sometimes it doesn't work great, but you know what? We have to go through all this stuff just to get that one packet to you. So thank you for hanging in with me on my first solo full episode of the RUCKCast. Next week, we're going to wrap this up. We're going to talk about experts. One of my favorite topics of all time is experts. And if you heard me talk about this, then you're in for a repeat. If you haven't, please come back and stick around, because I've had to redefine what expert means over the last little while. And so, like I said, I hope you come back, and I will see you on the next one. Hey there, thanks for listening. If you like the show and haven't done so, please like and subscribe. If you want to contact the show directly, you can email us at ruckcast@comscope.com. I do read those emails. To learn more about any Ruckus products or services that we've talked about on this or any other prior podcast, please check out our About section of the show or the show notes. And as always, thank you for listening.